Okay, my new book is called Love, Fear, and the Destiny of Nations, and the subtitle of that book is The Impact of the Evolution of Human Consciousness on World Affairs. So what I'm attempting to do in this book, and right now I'm just publishing volume one, in volume one I'm looking at the evolution of human consciousness over the past 10 years and relating it to societal evolution over that period. And from that, I am drawing some lessons. I'm also identifying patterns that have been not just around in human time, but patterns to the whole of evolution. And from these patterns, I'm able to say, well, this is what is probably going to happen to our global society over the next 200 or 300 years. And the main pattern that I'm talking about are the universal stages of evolution, 3 universal stages of evolution, which apply at the atomic level, the cellular level, and at the level of Homo sapiens. And it's simply this. The first stage of evolution is to become viable and independent in your framework of existence. If you're not viable and independent, you do not survive. Then, as your framework conditions become more complex and survival is more difficult, these viable independent entities bond together to form group structures. And then as framework conditions become even more complex, those group structures cooperate with each other to create a higher order entity. So atoms became viable independent, bonded to form group structures, molecules cooperated to create cells. That's what a cell is, it's complex molecules cooperating. Cells became viable independent, bonded to form group structures, organisms cooperated, create creatures. One of those creatures, Homo sapiens, is learning how to become viable independent, in other words, psychological development, personal development, whatever it is, become viable independent, bond together to form group structures, nations, and those nations are now learning how to cooperate with each other to create a new, higher order entity. You can call it humanity if you want, but the conclusion that I reach in the book is that inevitably we are going to get to a point where we need global governance, because the problems of existence are global, but the structures and systems we have for dealing with those global problems are national. And you can't solve those larger problems with the same level of consciousness at which you created them. So what this book essentially is about is that pathway of societal evolution through to global governance. And one major step in that way, along that path, is democracy. And so the second part of the book really looks at the 7 stages to the evolution of democracy, from freedom to equality to accountability to fairness, openness, transparency and trust. And each one of those is an essential step on that pathway to high trust democracy. Now, what is pretty interesting is that here in Sweden, you are further along that path than almost every other nation, except perhaps Norway and Denmark. You're at the similar level, but you are the exemplars of that evolution of consciousness. And there are reasons for that. One of the main reasons is that you have a very homogeneous population. But there are also other reasons, maybe climatic ones too. But so for me, what I see in Sweden is the template for the potential future evolution of nations. And then how nations, and what I see in Europe, in terms of the European Union, is the template for the steps that we need to take to get to global democracy. And basically, it follows the universal stage of evolution. So what we're saying is that nations are now bonding to, cooperating with each other to create a regional entity. And now, what I'm anticipating happen is that other regional entities will come out. Caribbean, North America, South America, Arab states will become regional entities. Those regional entities will then cooperate with each other to create a new higher order governance system, a world governance system, which will go far beyond the UN. And the problem actually with the UN right now is the Security Council, because every one of them, member of the Security Council, has a veto. And that veto means that if I as Russia or I as America want to invade somebody, I can, and then when the Security Council meets, I can use my veto so nobody can do anything. There's no accountability at that Security Council level. And this is, I find it absolutely amazing that we're living in a situation where there's no democratic accountability at the highest level of global governance. It cannot continue. So, in brief, that's what the book's about. But there's more to it than that, because I actually, in this first volume, I take a look at what's happening in Bhutan, what's happening in Sweden, what's happening in United States, also a little bit what's happening in UK, and I make comparisons. In volume 2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the data that we've got from the 15 or 16 nations that we've mapped the values of those nations, and I'm going to have chapters on every nation to say, this is the state of the nation, this is what we've measured, and this is how it relates, what we've measured, how it relates to the real situation. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to place this values assessment instrument as a tool for helping communities and nations to grow and evolve through making conscious evolution, making the evolution of consciousness conscious. Because if you can map values, relate them to consciousness levels, which we can do, then you can actually do that, make the evolution of consciousness conscious. That has never happened before in human history. And so that's why I'm excited about my new book and the work that we are doing. I think you have to look at societal evolution in the following way. Every nation is a crucible of consciousness in the sense that every nation has a particular culture. And every culture of every nation can be mapped to certain levels of consciousness. And so all nations are at different places in that evolution. If you want some data on that, other than our own data that we're using to measure, and probably by the end of 2013 we'll have mapped the values of over 20 different nations, go to the Economic Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index, and you'll see that there's a very fine-tuning system for democracy. There are some 26 nations which are the Economic Intelligence Unit recognized as being full democracies, and then there's a whole bunch of them which are flawed democracies, hybrid regimes, and then authoritarian regimes. Interestingly, the Italy and France dropped from those full democracies to flawed democracies last year, according to the Economic Intelligence Unit, mainly because of the policies and the personal influence of the leaders of those two nations in societal affairs. Sarkozy and Berlusconi both disappeared from the political agenda because they were actually using their power for personal purposes. And of course, people don't like that. So we haven't mapped the values of Italy, but just 2 months before the French election, we mapped the values of France, and we found the degree of dysfunction in the nation, we call it cultural entropy, was in the 70s, which means a really high degree of entropy. So when I saw that, I thought, there's no way that Sarkozy can actually be re-elected with that degree of dysfunction in the nation. So we've been using this mapping system in organizations for many years now, and we have many clients that map their values every year, and they're able to monitor the culture and then take corrective actions when things are not going in the right direction. And what I'm proposing in Love, Fear and the Destiny of Nations is using this similar tool to actually map the values of nations so that nations can have a feedback from the population as to how well they are doing and what is the level of cultural entropy, degree of dysfunction, and where the issues are in detail, because that's what this tool enables you to do. What the word mindfulness means to me, it's actually several things. The first thing it means is be present, to being in the moment, present to the awareness of the moment. And when you're in that present moment awareness, you're happy because you're totally focused on the present moment. The fears usually are all about the future. And if you're angry, it's usually all about the past. So if you can be in the present moment, you can be outside of anger and fear, which is a huge advantage in life. So present moment awareness is mindfulness, but the practice of mindfulness, continuing to be in the present moment and practicing being in the present moment, conditions the mind to be in that fear-free and anger-free state. And over time, you learn how to deal with the subconscious fears that may come up and may upset you. We all have them. We learn them in childhood, usually during the age of between 0 and 7 years old, where the limbic brain, the reptilian brain are formed, but the prefrontal cortex is not formed yet because the size of the birth canal. And so babies' heads grow, or children's heads grow, and they grow by that final development of the prefrontal cortex, which is in fact the reasoning part of the brain. So up to the age of 7, you're living in a very emotional world and trying to find pleasure and avoid pain through understanding emotionally what is happening, but not using reasoning powers. So you learn beliefs sometimes which are dysfunctional because everybody grows up in a dysfunctional family. I mean, we're all dysfunctional to a certain amount. And so children learn some dysfunctional beliefs. But the problem is that those beliefs stay with them then for the rest of their lives and become, the livelihood of psychotherapists. Trying to let go of those subconscious fear-based beliefs, impatience. Well, I can broadly describe them as not having enough, not being loved enough, and not being enough, not having enough self-esteem. And those are the 3 big categories of fear, subconscious fears we learn during childhood. And you spend the rest of your life trying to deal with that. You're unable to focus your consciousness on the evolution of your soul and the growth of your soul because your consciousness is preoccupied with these unmet needs. So personal mastery leads, you use mindfulness to focus on personal mastery so you can overcome or rationalize or understand these fears, so you can be in present moment awareness. And as you learn every day to be in present moment awareness, you create a space for the soul and its needs to come through and for you to live the values and the purpose of your soul. And the more you're able to practice mindfulness, the more you're able to live in soul consciousness. And eventually you get to the point where you recognize that you are the vehicle for your soul. You live your life understanding that the purpose, the passion that you feel in your heart is actually your soul purpose. And when that point arises, you realize that you have no needs because the soul belongs in the quantum reality of the energetic world and is able to make connections and make things happen. So every need that you think you might have is satisfied before you even know you have it because you're totally aligned with your soul purpose. Now, if the ego is still hanging on to fears, that will disrupt the focus, the mindfulness that allows the soul to pass its thoughts to you and direct you in your life. So that's the importance of mindfulness, is to open yourself up to soul consciousness so you can lead a soul-directed life. So for me, right now, what I recognize is I am the servant of my soul. And that's how I live my life. I listen to the inspiration, thoughts which come to me and direct my life in the most amazing and joyful way. So all I have to do now is listen, show up, and magic happens. And we call that sometimes synchronicity. I say synchronicity rains down on me because I'm living the life of my soul. I've lived 25 years in North America. And what I've seen over there is polarities. On the one hand, great advancements in spiritual understanding and spiritual training and things of that nature. And on the other hand, really deep capitalism with greed, etc., etc. Here in Europe, we're somehow not exposed to these two extremes. But what is missing in Europe, in my opinion, is the training ground, the retreat centers, which exist in North America, but somehow don't exist here in Europe. And I think it's time now for those who embrace the concept of mindfulness, embrace the concept of spirituality, and want to live it in their everyday lives. I don't mean hermits to go off and contemplate for 2 years. I mean, really live your mindfulness. That we need more retreat centers where we can learn the techniques, how to do that. And so for me, the Mindhouse Park, it could be a brilliant example of what is possible in Europe. Because I think we've got an amazing heritage, but we've just not really got ourselves organized to provide retreat centers for individuals, for groups, and for society, where they can meet and talk about these topics. Because for me, these topics are fundamental for our personal evolution. And our personal evolution is fundamental for our group evolution in organizations and other groups and communities. And the group evolution is fundamental for societal evolution. And I think these three things can come together in Mindhouse Park. That's my dream for Mindhouse Park. I am a great believer in that every person on the planet needs to follow their soul inspiration. And so when somebody comes along and creates a Mindhouse Park, you have to go with that inspiration. And the people with that inspiration, if they are totally in alignment with who they are, will receive even deeper inspiration about what is the right thing to do. Now, it is very useful to gather thought leaders and other people together, to have discussions about the opportunities for the future and what the possibilities might be. But ultimately, it's the inspiration of the founders of something like Mindhouse Park which must guide the future. Because if it doesn't, those founders will find themselves not in alignment with what they're creating. So, Anders, I would say to you, and Marlin, seek out your own inspiration. Listen to the many voices that are around you, but use that just as information. Follow what is in your heart and listen to your soul, because you will get all the guidance you need, because you will be living in alignment with who you truly are. And your soul wants to manifest something on the planet. It has been wanting to do that for many years. So listen. Be quiet and listen, and you'll know exactly what to do.